Welcome to the Misophonia podcast. This is episode 209. My name is Adil Ahmad, and I have Misophonia. This week I'm talking to Kathryn, who runs an ecology nonprofit in Southern Oregon. Kathryn shares her journey with misophonia, particularly how it's impacted her life as a parent. She reflects on her childhood experiences with sensitivities, the lack of understanding from those around her, and how her relationship with her husband has provided a supportive environment. We talk about the impact of misophonia on her relationships, particularly with her daughter, and strategies she employs to manage her sensitivities. Kathryn also explores therapeutic approaches. We talk about Psilocybin and Acupuncture, and she emphasizes the importance of understanding and support from family and friends in helping. After the show, let me know what you think. You can reach out to me by email at hello@misophoniapodcast.com or hit me up on Instagram or Facebook at Misophonia Podcast. By the way, please head over, leave a quick rating or review wherever you listen to the show. It really helps move us up in the algorithms and reach more misophones. A few quick announcements. If you want to come on the show, just go to misophoniapodcast.com and click the Be a Guest link. And there's an easy way to book a time slot. There are also guides for home improvement for a quieter home on the website, misophoniapodcast.com/guides. And I also want to remind folks to check out misophoniapodcast.com/research for a new platform I'm developing to create novel research proposals based on past literature and stories from the podcast. And if you want to support the show, the misophonia.shop is open. There's lots of merch there, and there'll be more coming, so please take a look. And speaking of support, thanks for the incredible ongoing support of our Patreon supporters. If you feel like contributing, you can read all about the various levels at patreon.com/misophoniapodcast. All right, now here's my conversation with Kathryn. Kathryn, welcome to the podcast. Great to have you here.
Good to be here.
Awesome. So do you want to, let us know kind of about where you're located and stuff?
Yeah, I live in Southwest Oregon.
Cool. Okay. Not in the Portland area, like maybe, what is that? What's around there?
I live in Medford. There's also
okay. Yeah.
Ashland. There's a couple of those smaller towns. It's just, Medford, Ashland, that area.
Yeah. So, I've talked to some people from Portland. So I guess, what do you do over there?
I'm an ecologist. I run a nonprofit, and we do sort of plant-based restoration work and advocacy and, work with restoring pollinator habitat and growing native seeds and all kinds of cool stuff. It's a dreamy, dreamy job.
Awesome. And you started that nonprofit, or you're running it now?
I did, yeah. I helped founded it
cool.
back
What's
in
the name of it?
2019. The Understory Initiative.
Cool. All right. So Kathryn, you want to tell us kind of what's maybe starting kind of in the present, like how's misophonia in your life right now?
Yeah, I'm really in it. I feel like I'm trying a lot of things currently because I've been really struggling in a very particular way, specifically with being a parent. And so I've been doing, I guess I would be interested to share some of the things I've tried. I'm kind of like right in the middle of seeing if anything's actually going to work or make a difference. So I'm sort of on that sort of discovery path of like, what can I actually do about this to make life a little bit easier to manage.
Yeah. So when you say things are getting bad as a parent, is it your child that's triggering you, or things around you as your parent?
Yeah. So I adopted my daughter with my husband in 2020, and she was an infant. And I think the adoption process was great, but I just very immediately, well, I guess I didn't realize it at first, but I think what was going on is I was just being highly triggered by her and just sort of like always having to be in proximity, and like little kids,
Mm-hmm.
you have to sit with them to eat. You have to do, there's just a lot of
Mm-hmm.
contact, and you can't just step out of the room or do the normal things you do with misophonia to, remove yourself because you're in charge of taking care of that little human. And she also, I think, triggered me in ways that I hadn't really experienced with other people before. So I didn't quite catch on right away. And so I thought I just hated being a parent basically for the first couple years.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was anxiety or trauma or, just sort of not being able to handle the experience particularly well. But, after kind of working through, a lot of cognitive behavioral type work and dealing with my thoughts, I still baseline felt like on a nervous system level triggered in her presence almost constantly. Um, and it wasn't livable. I mean, I just couldn't, I was reaching a breaking point where I, there's just so much negativity building up. I was like, this isn't good for anybody. Um, and so then, I ended up with a therapist who helped me key into the misophonia part of it by just recognizing that a lot of the struggles I was having with her revolved around sounds. And I had sort of put misophonia as like a thing in the back burner, hadn't really been a big part of my life for the last 20 years, which I can go into why I think that is. But yeah, it caught me off guard. I sort of misidentified it, even though I knew that I was somebody who has misophonia. And so I've been kind of just unraveling that and trying to figure out like, what do I do now that I recognize that I, have a brain condition or a disability that kind of makes me allergic to my own kid. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what I'm in. Yeah.
So yeah, no, interesting. Thanks for sharing that. So it looks like you've been through a couple therapists. Did the current one know about misophonia beforehand, and
She
or did they
didn't.
just kind of learn about it? Didn't. Okay.
No, so the reason I went to her was because, again, I was thinking this was all trauma related. And so I wanted to do EMDR, which is that
Right.
like bilateral
Yeah.
stimulation therapy for people who have PTSD and things, because I thought I had complex PTSD. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we did our first session, you're supposed to revisit a really traumatic experience of your
Mm-hmm.
childhood. And for me, like the the experience I revisited was just like being on a road trip with family and having people being eating chips in the car while we drove a long way. And like
Mm-hmm.
that really stood out to her as not a typical trauma experience. And so then she did some research on her own and so was like, hey, this stands out to me as being not your typical PTSD situation. There's this thing called misophonia. Are you aware of it? And I was like, oh yeah, I have that. And she was like,
Mm-hmm.
we need to like talk about this. And so she
Mm-hmm.
really encouraged me to, I think I had a lot of shame around it, and I had just decided that there's nothing to be done. So don't think about it. Don't try to do anything for it. This is just your life. And find other ways to live. And she was like, I think we can, like, there's a lot of new research out recently, and I think we can try different things, and we should at least attempt to do that. And I just had a lot of shame about even putting resources into like looking into it or trying, to fix it.
Yeah. So did you? So then you knew about misophonia, obviously, and but when you adopted after you adopted your child, you didn't connect that to misophonia until you talked to this therapist, or
Yeah, it happened. Yeah, it just, like I said, the way she triggered me, and I just never spent time around little kids
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
previously. And so and I think that there's so much intensity around being a parent, and it was during the middle of the pandemic. There's just a lot going on.
Yeah, you thought there was other stuff going
Um,
on. Yeah.
like I think I just my I thought of myself as somebody who primarily had an anxiety disorder, who also
Hmm.
struggled with sounds. And so that was like kind of the first thing that came to my mind is like this strong reaction I have to being around her is about anxiety and trauma. It's
Yeah.
it just wasn't, it was so constant that it just didn't, like usually with the misophonia response, like it feels like uh kind of like brief sort of
Hmm.
episode, I guess. But with my experience of being a parent is like that episode never ended. I was just
Yeah.
in an activated nervous system state every time I was around her. And so there was no, I mean, there was, I'm sure like dips and valleys, but
Hmm.
it just felt like anxiety. It didn't feel like my normal, misophonia, like the second, I just want to leave this room right now. It felt like more encompassing than that.
Yeah. It didn't feel like fight or flight. It was a constant barrage,
Yeah.
I guess,
Yeah.
or just a constant. Your nervous system was just kind of shot and did not recover.
Right.
Um, so what did your what did you? We'll get to the past. Love to get to the past, obviously, but currently, like I guess maybe what then did this current therapist, after having gone through the research, start to work with you on?
So she um encouraged me to find an audiologist in my area that could, do some testing and, help me. She's like, this is out of my realm because, this is like a neurophysical issue. But I want to support you in getting the help you need. And so I, looked at my insurance plan and tried to find a audiologist in my area. And when I called and told them about my condition, there was just a lot of like, I got brushed off as like, you don't know what you're talking about. This isn't real. They referred me, they said I should talk to an ear, nose, and throat person. They were just like very confused, and didn't know about the condition, didn't take it seriously. And that just sort of felt, for me, it just fed into this really long history of growing up as somebody who, like, this has always been um, not believed. It's been a thing that, people in my family and people just can't quite grasp what it is like to live with.
Hmm.
And so they just tell me to tune it out, basically. And so it just felt like a authority figure saying, just tune it out. Like, what are you talking about? This isn't real. And I think that just sent me shut down. And so it just took a while. It took like 6 months of working with my therapist, just get up the guts to like find somebody else who would advocate for me and like try to help me. And so I did get hooked up with Dr. Marcia Johnson in Portland, and she is, it's a 5 hour drive. It's not
She
necessarily
knows a few
convenient
things
to
about
like,
misophonia.
she knows a few things, right? And so I had a consultation with her over the phone, and we tried to work some things out, but just like the logistics of me getting to Portland regularly were challenging. And then
Hmm.
it just turns out that my therapist, she has a hearing loss in one of her ears and wears and has a audiologist that she really likes. And although this person I'm working with isn't in my insurance plan, they're out of sort of the service provider list. She knew about misophonia, and so she, basically it was like being referred by somebody who's like, well, I really like my audiologist. Maybe you should call her. And I did, and then she was like, yeah, I know what that is. Like I, have treated it before. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Um, and so that set me on a path to work with her. And then there's also like a handful of other things that I tried just because it had gotten so bad that, I couldn't function in my family.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, just a note about audiologists. Marcia Johnson knows a lot about. It's funny, obviously, she kind of in the '90s was kind of really probably the first person that really identified it. But I mean, for the record, I'm not. It's not even an opinion. Audiology is not the answer. Yes,
No.
it has to do with the ear, it has to do with listening. But I look forward to the day when we can um, take audiology out of the equation as much as possible. There's there's research going into it. but it's not the it's not the answer, and it just shows how misunderstood misophonia is, not only amongst people but amongst researchers. And I'll put double quotes there, air quotes. Um,
Right.
but let me get off my soapbox and go back to maybe back to kind of like your childhood. Like, when did you start to recognize it?
I, one of those people that has a hard time remembering a lot of their childhood. But there were a couple things that
Mm,
really stood out to me. Um, when I was in grade school, I think third, fourth, fifth grade range, I did Montessori. So you're in the same classroom for 3 years with the same group of kids, same teacher. And like that teacher was sort of your main educator. You'd go to like gym and art, but that was it. The rest of the day you spent in that room. And this particular teacher had a very sharp sound to her S when she talked. And I remember it just being like physically, it's just excruciating to be in the room with her. And I
mm,
know that she would have like story time and we'd sit down in the circle. And she decided, I don't know why, to read Moby Dick of all things to this class of, you know, kids that could barely understand. And so I remember just hating Moby Dick, hating her, um, getting
mm,
so overwhelmed by those feelings that I would just cry in the corner. And, ironically, I was like one of her favorite students. So I like learned this sort of weird pattern of hiding it very well and just sort of letting this like internal landscape of like feeling so out of control and angry like not surface, because I knew it wasn't acceptable, and I knew that I would receive shame, and I think that that was
mm-hmm.
reinforced by my family not understanding. And I'm sure there was stuff earlier than that where I was acting strangely, because of sounds, and they didn't understand it, and they were just had the response of tune it out, like
Right,
ignore it,
get over it.
and that
Yeah.
you get that enough, and so then in the school environment, that was really, so that really stuck out to me. And then I think there are little things like growing up, I had kind of an old heating system and it would make these clicks all night. And I just would have the hardest time sleeping. And, nobody, it was, the 90s. Like I couldn't just go to the store and like buy earplugs. I didn't really even know that that was a thing. I was a little kid. And so I
Mm-hmm.
would like put tissues in my ears and like cover my head with a pillow, but I could always hear the clicking enough where I just would have a really hard time sleeping. And so I had insomnia. And then there's just other, family issues surrounding that. There just wasn't room for me to struggle with this thing because
Yeah.
I had to also grow up really fast. And so I think there's just like a combination of factors that just made me kind of like push it to the side.
What do you mean by grow up really fast?
My growing up, we had a divorce that was really challenging in my
Mm,
family, and my mom, um, I would say is like sort of undiagnosed ADHD almost to like a
mm-hmm.
non-functional level. Like she wasn't really a caretaker that could handle meeting my needs. And so
Mm,
I ended up, kind of becoming the parent pretty quickly out of necessity. And then on with my dad, although he was, a little more put together, the person he chose to remarry with was very autistic, and I also think quite narcissistic. And so she was really intimidated by the relationship I had with my dad and my sister had with
mm,
my dad. And so she did everything in her power to break that relationship so she could be the main event, right? And I think that was the narcissism. And so, I essentially didn't have my dad to rely on because he was codependent with her, and like his all of his energy went into protecting her and her sensitivities from having um, autism, which we didn't even like know have a word for it then. It just
mm-hmm.
was, she would get migraines and have sensitivities, and everything was a challenge for her. And that was the focus of the family. So yeah, I think I just out of necessity looked at my life and was like, there's not room for me to be sensitive and struggle. Like, I need to set that stuff aside just to get through the day.
Wow. Yeah, that is a lot to deal with. And yeah, very taxing on the nervous system, very, and a heightened sense of
Yeah.
awareness that you must have had. Um, how about your sister? How's your relationship with your sister at that time?
At that time, it was not good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm kind of like a highly sensitive, empathic, quiet person. My sister is, loud and social and extroverted. And she was really struggling with our family dynamic, and that tended to make her pretty angry and violent. And so,
Mm,
um, there was also that element of, I think I blamed my sister for a lot of the sort of triggeringness of the household, of just being really loud.
yeah.
And always having the TV on, always, eating snacks. And so I ended up spending a lot of time just hiding in my room and trying
Mm,
to like have a safe space. And then, um, yeah, I mean, it wasn't a good relationship, but it's better now. And I think
mm-hmm.
she's matured a lot, and, obviously isn't such a, loose cannon but both of us were struggling just in different ways when we were kids.
Yeah. How about at school at the time?
I was always a really good student, and I think it was just the people pleasing survival thing.
And and were your triggers starting to proliferate as you got older?
It's interesting. I mean, I had that one teacher, but in high school, it didn't seem that bad. For me, generally, I don't get triggered in environments that are kind of noisy anyways. And I do know that, like, when I would take tests and things, I would, if somebody had a cold and was like sniffing, I would need to be put in a different room so that I could focus. But I don't think that was just sort of seen as me being sensitive. It wasn't seen as like necessarily tied to the specific sound. But now I look back and I see that. So there was some accommodations made of, like, this kid's gonna lose their shit if she's in a room where it's
Yeah.
quiet, And I remember, like, even just taking like the SAT and some of those, exams as a high schooler, just being terrified somebody was gonna be sniffing.
How did you react? Was it kind of very vocal, or was it very still kind of like bottling it up and just shutting down?
Oh, I brought it all inside. I just
Yeah.
I think used I basically shamed myself to the point where I would shut down, and so then I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't lash out, because I would feel the anger, and then I'd feel shame about the anger, and then I
Mm-hmm.
think the shame would it kind of worked to manage the condition in a way, but in a very unhealthy way.
Yeah. Definitely probably having just continuing the damage. Did you tell friends at all?
No, I struggled with, again, I was kind of overly mature. I had a hard time relating to kids my
Mm-hmm.
age. I mostly related to
Mm,
adults.
mm,
Um, and it's one of those things, like, when you're not being triggered, you kind of don't think about it. But then when you are being triggered, you're just like, I just want to do everything in my power to not freak out. And so you don't
yep.
have the capacity to talk about it. I just don't think I had the words, and I just sort of assumed, like, I'm just too sensitive. I'm making it up anyways. Like, what is there to talk about?
No
I'm
one wants to
wrong.
hear
The
about it.
world is,
Yeah.
yeah, no,
Right.
yeah. And then when you do talk about it, people get offended, in my
Right.
experience, and I'm highly sensitive to that. So I was just like, nope, not gonna. I'll just deal with it.
Hey, I think everyone, I'm
Yeah.
nodding along, and I know everyone else is nodding along too. So, and how about, well, I guess, yeah, as you got older, you said something about the last 20 years, you don't really think about it. Was there a period then that things kind of chilled out a bit?
Yeah, so I moved away, went to college in Oregon. So I grew up in the Midwest, and
Mm-hmm.
now, ended up in Oregon. And I, pretty quickly met my now husband. And I guess it was just one of those fluke things where he just was not a triggering person to me, even though I spent all my time around him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I suspect that, like, whatever it is in me that picks up on people's emotions and does that sort of like, picking up of the emotional landscape around me, my powers
Mm-hmm.
don't work on him. And so being with him is kind of like being in a quiet room. Whereas being around
Mm.
other people, it's like very like on an emotional level, like loud. Like I sort of absorb their emotions and, take them into myself. And then there's also the misophonia part. Um, but with him, it was like I could just be myself and I wasn't like getting inundated by his emotional landscape. And maybe that's just that he was like a secure attachment, healthy human. I just wasn't around many of those. And so he just didn't give
Doesn't
off
sound
that
like it,
like
right? Yeah.
needy vibe, of like I need to be taken care of all the time and it's your job to manage my emotions for me. He was like in charge of it. He knew how to do it relatively well. And so I think that just like lowering my vigilance of like it's my job to make sure everyone around me is always happy when I didn't have to do that around him, it just like it took down the stakes on our relationship and I could just exist with him. And so it just made me less triggerable, if that makes sense. And then,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, there were things and like, he was sensitive and would know, like, we didn't like sit next to each other and eat dinner. If we did, we would always have like the TV on or some sound. And I'm sure like we talked about, he knows that I have this sensitivity. It's very clear to him, but like his response was just like, okay, well, let's just build our life around,
Work around it. Yeah.
making that not be such a big deal. Like, let's, yeah, it's, there wasn't, and we were together for 20 years, or we have been together for 20 years. And so, you know, we just recently became parents. And so that whole time before, you know, basically we were living lives that just were built in a way that weren't particularly triggering. And then on top of
Mm-hmm.
it, he was just happened to be kind of one of those people that I could, that's why we got married. Like he was a really easy person for me to be around, which is just not something I really ever experienced, especially with people who are really close to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow. So all those years with your husband, it really went down many many levels, right?
Yeah.
The
Which is
misophonia.
then when I became a parent, I like didn't see it coming because I just hadn't been in it, basically. I'd get
And
I'd get triggered every once in a while, but it felt more like at a normal level, right?
yep. And another reason why it's not an audiological issue, I'll just get back on my soapbox briefly, and then I'll come back down.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating, and but outside the home, obviously, your husband wasn't triggering you much, but when you went out into the world, did you feel like you were being triggered, or maybe your nervous system was at a relatively good place, and you just overall were not being triggered so much?
I I don't think I was being triggered so much. I mean, there were certain things that would stand out to me, like, you know,
Go to the
being in a
movies or
car with a
something,
dog who
or
was like,
yeah.
had, making sounds. Yeah, I think that, again, I think a lot of my triggers are being in enclosed, quiet spaces with people I live with. It didn't really
Mm-hmm.
translate to just everyday life. And I think the reason I got triggered in school was in those like very specific scenarios of like high pressure testing or in a room that I knew I couldn't escape with this sound that was always going on, or in a family unit where you can't just leave, especially when you're a kid. Like you rely on your family to take care of you. That's where you live. Like you can't feasibly just check out and go somewhere else. And so when I became an adult, I feel like I got enough agency over my life and I had a partner who was sensitive and like accepting of what the deal was, that it kind of, I mean, dissolved in a lot of ways. There's
Mm-hmm.
still
Mm-hmm.
things that would trigger me, but it just was, once a week. I can deal with once a week. I can't
Yeah.
deal with 10 times an hour.
Right. It's amazing that because a lot of people will meet somebody and then have that kind of a honeymoon period, but that eventually goes away. It seems like yours was really um, like something got fixed to some level. The once a week thing. I mean, that's on par with like the best, I think, case scenarios of a lot of therapies and treatments. So there's
Yeah,
something.
and it's hard to remember, I guess, specifically because
Mhm.
our memories don't really function that well. But yeah, I mean, I think that that was sort of unfortunate because it almost led to me not identifying this sooner because I had had that
Mhm.
break, and
Mhm.
I had just be able to create distance from it. But a lot of it was just circumstance, I think.
Yeah. So when did you find out it had a name?
I think it was, when Marsha Johnson probably did an interview with National Public Radio in like
Mm.
2012-ish. So I heard that interview and I was like, oh, I have that. Like, that is me. There's a name
Mhm.
for it. And I think at that point, I did a little research and I told my therapist, and the consensus then was like, there's nothing to be done. Like, there's no cure. It just is. And then when
Mhm.
my therapist was like, well, the one treatment we have is exposure therapy, I was like, nope, not going to do that. So yeah, I'm just going to deal with it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll expose myself. I don't need you to.
Yeah, I get plenty of exposure. Thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Interesting. Okay. And after so that was with your one of your recent therapists, or you had a therapist back in 2012?
2012, yeah, because I was in
Okay.
grad
Okay.
school and I was
Yeah.
losing my mind for other reasons. And so, yeah, that was part of the support structure. And so it was like misophonia was just one of the things I came to the table with in my like set of things I was dealing with, and it just
Yeah.
didn't rise up to be. It wasn't like that important relative to like the anxiety disorder and all the other stuff I was coping with.
Yeah. Were you using? I mean, you said it wasn't popping up very much, but did throughout your life, did you generally have coping methods other than just pushing it down, like earplugs, earbuds, headphones, things like that, noise
I
machines?
think, yeah, I mean, again,
You
I
may
think
not
I
have
would
if it
use
wasn't a
like,
big deal,
yeah,
but yeah.
yeah, like music. Certainly,
Hmm.
like listening to background music was a big thing for me. I honestly felt like it was rude to wear headphones or earplugs.
Yeah.
And so I specifically avoided that for years. Like, I felt just intense shame if somebody could tell that a sound was
Mm-hmm.
bothering me.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Even my husband, which is silly, because obviously he knew what was going on, but because it felt so weird and deviant and like not like I was making it up, being too sensitive, and it was shameful. Like, I didn't want people to have a visual cue that I was struggling, because that felt like it was exposing myself too much. And so I specifically didn't do things like that other than, trying to create distance for myself and other people when they were eating, or like,
Right.
sort of do really subtle things that people wouldn't quite pick up on, but then sometimes I'd find myself like in a car, and I would just like lose my mind basically until,
Mm-hmm.
maybe I would lash out at that point, like I just couldn't take it anymore. And I would just be like, but I would mostly internalize it, right? And so, my husband was relatively good at picking up on it, and like we would have a way of managing it sort of below the surface. We didn't like explicitly talk about. It was just sort of
Mm-hmm.
done. It was like, oh, this is pissing you off, I'm going to stop, or like, you know, we'll turn the radio on, like we would in it together. And he has maybe some sensitivity as well, so he kind of understood. Um,
That's a fascinating
but yeah, I
concept.
just think I
If
tried to hide it. Yeah,
something's pissing you off, I'll just stop. It's pretty
yeah,
easy. I wish more people would pick up on that.
yeah.
That's great. Well, speaking, you said something about visuals, and in a different context, visual triggers. Do you find that that's something that you've noticed?
Recently, I have clued into that. I think it's always been the case. And so I do think I have some kind of weird visual triggers, not necessarily connected to the sounds,
Mm,
but they're separate things with like the way people move their hands sometimes, or just I think in general, really twitchy behavior that can be a challenge to be around. And my daughter, I think one of the challenges I have with her is she's extremely high energy, always moving. Like she's kind of got that twitchy, dysregulated nervous system vibe about her all the time. And so I think even
mm,
when she's not making a sound, I'm dysregulated just because of her body movements and the chaos that and even on an emotional level, because I know that, um, there's a lot of dysregulation, and little kids are just like that. They just don't know how to manage their emotions. And
right.
as an
I'm sure
empath, pick
this,
up on that and absorb it. Yeah.
right, but I see, parallels, with obviously when you were a child, you were having to pick up on dysregulation and keeping
Yeah.
everyone in check. So, part of you, I'm sure, is feeling that. I know I know I do that. Did your does your family now, like not your husband and your child, but does your parents and sister know about misophonia now?
Yeah, done a little bit of educating. Like I just sent them an article this morning that came
How
out
did
that
that
I thought
go?
was really, it's fine. I mean, they're
Yeah.
like, yeah, of course. Like you've,
Okay.
had this weird thing all the time. I don't think that even like my husband, I don't think it's necessarily clear to them to the extent to which it
Mm,
impacts me, because I've done such a good job of hiding it for so long, and it's been wrapped into all these other
right.
struggles. I think that they're like, yeah, that's a thing you have, but I don't think they don't have the experience of like how big of a deal it can be for somebody who has
Yeah.
it, which makes sense because they're not in it.
Right. Have you met anyone else who has it?
One or two people, and yeah, it's, some passing conversations, and I think that was before I really dove deep into trying to fix this in various ways. And so, um, I didn't really know what I was talking about when I would talk to people about it. But now I feel pretty educated on it. So yeah, I hear of people like, oh, I have a friend who says that
Mm,
too. It's sometimes hard to know because, a lot of people would just say, oh yeah, I have that too. And you're like, no, no, you don't.
yeah. Yeah.
I can tell that you don't. And because, it
I
is a
talked to
shared
somebody.
experience.
Yeah, one of the at least one of the other. Actually, I've talked to a few people in Oregon. One of them is actually in that kind of I think she's in like kind of the fish ecology space somewhere up
Oh,
there. Might be an
interesting.
interesting person to talk to. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, maybe we can kind of connect offline.
that'd be
But
great.
very so yeah. I mean, I guess going back to your I don't know, maybe talking about your daughter a bit. I know there's a lot of parents, new parents, or young parents who have or parents of young children who have misophonia. Do you tell her about it? Like, how do you manage that?
Well, she's 4.
Mm-hmm,
So she's just getting to the age where I can say things like, that hurts mommy's ears. Can you
mm-hmm,
chew with your mouth closed? Things like that. Um, but again, there's just this like raw energy that's part of her being
yeah,
that I know she can't control, that like isn't going to go away anytime soon. And so, there's just only so much I can do. But we don't sit and eat dinner as a family. Like we kind of go our separate ways. And so we try to minimize it. And now we've gotten to a stage too where, she used to be just so wild. The only way we could keep her calm was by having her eat stuff in the car. And so I would just, you know, bear it. And now we've gotten to the point where we can be like, no, like we're not going to eat snacks in the car. Um,
mm,
you can wait till we get there and then I can get my space, and she can, eat what she needs to eat, or at least like not eating particularly crunchy things. Or,
yeah,
if she's eating and she wants a hug from me, I'll be like, can you finish chewing? And then I'll come and give you things like that. So,
right,
it's a balance because I don't obviously want to shame her for doing, very normal, eating activities and learning how to chew with her mouth closed. She's a little kid. But I also like want to take care of our relationship and, have a positive outlook on being around her. And this condition just makes it so hard to break through that layer of being triggered so much that I can't enjoy being around her.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I didn't mean to laugh earlier. I also have
No,
a
it's
4-year-old,
it's
so I
okay.
think about very very similar things. How to walk that line of taking
Yeah,
care of yourself and taking care of her, and also yeah, not wanting to shame, not wanting to you know um, cause trauma again in the family because we've been
right.
through a lot growing up. But yeah, I mean, now that I know, I mean, you're kind of another great example, but like it's not an audiological thing. Now I know that it's so many things happened early on in childhood to make me more sensitive and make me more vigilant. These are things I don't know I think about when I interact with my children, and I think that
Yeah.
in itself is a good thing. I mean, that having that knowledge,
Yeah, definitely. And I think it makes me a way better parent in a way.
right?
I think I have a lot of the problem solving skills and, phrasing things in a way where, it's
Mm-hmm.
allowing her to be who she is, but also
Mm-hmm.
setting boundaries. And so that's been really great. I'm missing out on the like warm, fuzzy part of being a parent.
Yeah,
And that's really hard.
yeah. There's a concept that's come up a few times called misophonia grief, which is that the grief over maybe the moments that we would miss out on, whether it's small things like getting a hug
Yeah.
while she's chewing, or larger things like that whole event where we might not be ready for. So
Yeah.
um, that's interesting. And you said you and your husband, you talk much about misophonia and your child, or is it just something that you're
Now
going
we
through?
do
Yeah.
because I reached a breaking point a few months ago where I was like, I don't think I can live as a family um
Mm,
like this anymore. And so, and I at that time I was identifying all this stuff, but I basically decided to move into a camper that we had at a property that I work on part time to just like get that space. And the idea was to figure out how to manage my own nervous system so that I could come back and not, be on red, high alert
yeah.
constantly because it was just not livable
Mm,
anymore. And so I kind of took a multi-pronged approach where, I got space. I, created a safe place for myself that I wasn't getting triggered on all the time. And then I was doing, therapy, working through everything I could on that angle, trying to find, something, being more comfortable wearing headphones, being more comfortable wearing earplugs. Like I do that now, protecting myself in the moment. And then I also decided, I really want to deal with this psychological, like neurological
mm-hmm.
element. So I also did a psilocybin journey
Mm,
because my thought was if I could, open up some neuroplasticity, maybe it would allow me to pick a different path and step away, at least from the misophonia reaction I was having so strongly to my daughter, and trying to find a different way to internalize that
mm-hmm.
relationship and build a new path. As well as I've been doing like acupuncture. I don't know, it all sounds kind of a little bit woo woo, but I just didn't know what else to do because nothing
Mm-hmm.
else that I had, been doing was working.
And the psilocybin, how did that go? Like how did you get it, and what were you doing with it?
Yeah, it's legal in Oregon, and so there
Mm-hmm.
is a clinic that I could go to. And I had a facilitator and, sort of just paid to do that. It wasn't cheap and not, I'm not really in the habit of spending money, but again, I felt like I was at a last resort.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it was like an all day, relatively high dose. So, you lose track. You can't sort of, you forget how to understand time. You don't, you really lose
Mm,
track of yourself. I've never done psychedelics before or really drugs in general.
mm-hmm.
And so it was a very profound experience. I think I was hoping that I would have an epiphany and be able to access that part of myself that does love being a parent and does feel that
Mm-hmm.
like warm, fuzzy connection to my daughter. And instead, what I got was more of a connection to myself and who I am and appreciating it and valuing it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really powerful, but it wasn't quite what I was hoping for. But I
Mm-hmm.
think it's still necessary to do. And so I'm really glad that I did it, and it just helped me recontextualize, sort of regain some energy to, keep fighting this fight and not just like give up on being a parent. Not that I was going to give up, but like stepping back in my role significantly, out of protecting myself.
Yeah. Did it have any kind of so after the session, is it something that you like how do you, I guess, reconnect to that experience? Do you just kind of think back to what you went through, or is it was there some permanent lasting kind of change that happened, you think? Or maybe those
I
one
think
kind of the
it's,
same thing.
yeah, it's kind of, I mean, to me, the way I describe it is like a year of therapy in a day. So it's
Mm.
a lot of work. I think my perspective on life was fundamentally changed, and like um, my place in the universe feels different. And then like also my appreciation and understanding of myself on a deep level feels different. And just, I think that like it's a thing that I can return to that I remember fairly well. And just knowing what it felt like to, there's a difference between, saying in your head, I'm worth it, or I'm, valuable, and all these things that we're supposed to believe. But in the psilocybin journey, like I actually felt with every fiber of my being what it felt like to believe those things fully, um, as opposed to just repeating a phrase in my head that I sort of kind of believed, right? And so I can return to that, and remember, at least in sort of a dream way, like what that felt like. And so that's been really powerful to just, especially with like my habit of using shame and, building up basically low self-esteem habits in order to manage the misophonia. I have a lot of rebuilding to do as far as just like having a good view of myself at all.
Yeah. And has that no, that's great. That I like how you put it, a year of therapy in a day. Is it something that kind of helps you maybe in your trigger, or recovering maybe from your trigger?
No, I don't.
Yeah.
I think honestly, what's helped me, I haven't found anything that's lowered the triggers, but I
Mm.
have found with maybe a combination of the psilocybin and then honestly acupuncture twice a week, my
Mm.
nervous system is just able to get to a calm state more easily. And so
Mm-hmm.
I have breaks from, like, I have space between the triggers, even though they do happen fairly regularly.
It's not that
I
constant
don't have
wall
control,
anymore.
but yeah, exactly. Like I, I do experience moments of calm and stuff around my daughter, whereas before it just wasn't available to me. Um, and then when I do get triggered, I have various, sort of like mindfulness techniques that I can use. And I think because my nervous system is in better shape and is like being more cared for, that actually works. Whereas previously I was in fight or flight trying to do mindfulness exercise and like doesn't really work. Like you have to deal with the nervous system first, basically. And so I wasn't dealing directly with my nervous system. I was dealing with, my thoughts um and those kind of surface level like cognitive
Mm-hmm.
things. And I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't,
Mm-hmm.
'cause, yeah, I wasn't dealing with the nervous system and the vagus nerve and like all these parts of us that, are also our system for detecting danger, right? On a very animal level. And so I just had to get kind of animal about it and like really, yeah, um, I guess re-inhabit my body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How about switching gears a little bit? How about at work? Um, Whether it's your current nonprofit or places you've worked in the past, do you get triggered much?
No, no, and I, it's we have a dispersed. working situation. I have an office. We all work from home or in the field. I do a lot of
Yeah.
outdoor stuff. So being outdoors is really great. And everyone on my staff is aware of this condition now
Mm-hmm.
that I've been, educating myself on it. And I don't really experience a lot of triggers with them, but just knowing that like if I have to step out of the room, like nobody's going to be offended or
Yeah.
wonder why,
That's
and I can
huge. Yeah.
explain it and they have a lot of compassion. But yeah, I think that I just don't get in situations very often that are triggering. If I have to go to a conference or meeting, I feel like now I could just wear earplugs and not feel shame about it. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
before I would just feel like everybody was staring at me and wondering why I was being so rude by wearing earplugs.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that sounds great. And yeah, being outdoors, engaging in more of your senses, I think
Yeah.
helps. And just having people who are understanding helps. Sometimes you don't need to reach for those tools if you just know that they're there and that the people around you are understanding. Baseline
Yeah.
nervous system is relaxed. Um, yeah. Well, I mean, Kathryn, we're yeah getting close to an hour, even though we got a little bit of a late start, but I guess I don't know any other epiphanies or stories or thoughts you want to share about your about misophonia or anything in general.
Yeah. I guess I'm I'm still trying to hang on to hope that there is a path. I think, maybe it'll just be my daughter getting older, being
Hmm.
able to be more sensitive. Like I do see improvement in my situation. Um, and I do have a lot of people who are actively helping me now, which is a big change. And so like I'm still trying to maintain a positive attitude, but I, certainly have days where I'm like, I'm still here. It's still this bad. Um, and so that's just really frustrating, especially when it feels like really important relationships are at stake. Um, but life is long. I think that's one of the things that the Misa or the psilocybin journey taught me was that there is enough time and that there is kind of like infiniteness, and to be able to feel what that feels like is a new experience to me where I definitely feel like everything is very limited and gone too fast and all the things. So trying to
Hmm.
just, I guess, have a bit of a philosophical awakening and
Yeah.
um, come to peace with it in
Perspective.
a,
Yeah.
yeah, perspective in a more healthy way, and then also know that I'm worth taking care of, and it's okay for people to sometimes make accommodations on my behalf.
Yeah, that's great. We don't have a lot of time, especially as a parent, to have those kinds of philosophical moments.
No,
And I think there's something key there in related to misophonia, whether learning from it or ways to apply these kind of more philosophical epiphanies to it to kind of like help our nervous system. I know this sounds kind of
yeah,
foo-foo too, but there's something here. It's not audiology, and that's the last thing I'll say about that. But um, Kathryn, this has been great. Like I said, for many reasons, I think this is gonna help a lot of people, parents, young parents, or just people who've experienced the kind of life you've had. These are themes that come up a lot. So thanks for sharing. And
yeah, it
yeah,
was really
good luck.
great conversation.
Thanks again, Kathryn. Wishing you the best, especially with the young one. I know it can be tough, but as they get older, it should get better. If you like the episode, don't forget to leave a quick review or just hit the 5 stars wherever you listen to this podcast. You can hit me up by email at hellomisophoniapodcast.com or go to the website, misophoniapodcast.com. It's even easier just to send a quick message on Instagram at Misophonia Podcast, and on Facebook, same thing. On Twitter or X, it's Misophonia Show. Music, as always, is by Moby, and until next week, wishing you peace and quiet.